Good evening once again. Thank you for being here with us. Chennai Photo Biennale, in association with Française of Madras, the Goethe-Institut Chennai, the Grid, and with the support of the Franco-German Cultural Fund, brings us this panel discussion on family portraiture in association with Martine Fougeron and Annu P Matthew. I'm going to give a small introduction to what we'll be discussing today and also what the residency is about. Martine is one of the mentors of the residency that has started yesterday, and it will go on till the 17th of November. We have 11 participants, majority of them from India and a few of them from South Asia, namely Nepal, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Today's discussion is about family photos. Family photos are an essential testimony of the way of life of a given period of time. They inform on the social status of the subject family, the event for which the photo was taken, the selection of family members displayed in the photo. The usual family patterns have been married couples with children, sometimes along with the grandparents. The group that is now considered to be a family is no longer with the same caste. So today we have Annu P Matthew. I can't spell the P, so I'm going to keep it as P. Annu P Matthew divides her time between her family home in Bangalore, India, and Providence, USA. Her photo-based artwork prompts the viewer to re-examine histories. Matthew is a professor of art at the University of Rhode Island. Her work was featured in the 2018 Kochi Museum's Biennale. Grants that have supported her work include 2 Fulbright fellowships. Her recent solo exhibitions include the Royal Ontario Museum, Nuit Blanche, Toronto, and Sepia Eye, New York. Matthew has also exhibited her work at the RISD Museum, New York Art Museum, Museum of Fine Arts, Boston and Houston, Victoria and Albert Museum, as well as the Smithsonian. And what you must also know is that Annu is working and is here in India on a very interesting project as part of her Fulbright Fellowship. She's collecting archives and photos of Indian soldiers who fought for the British during the World War II. In case if any of you have any friends or acquaintances who might have, fought during that time, please connect them to Annu. She's here today. We are hoping that a few people might turn up with some of their photographs for her. I go on to introduce our residency mentor, Martine Fougeron. Martine Fougeron is a fine art photographer living and working in New York, whose work has been exhibited internationally and is held in major public and private collections. Fougeron's first monograph, Teen Tribe, will be published by Steigle in 2015. Fougeron was born in Paris and studied at LFNY, l'Institut d'études politiques de Paris. I don't know if I got that right. And she has been living in New York and working as a photographer for the last 10 years, having turned to photography after a successful career as a creative director in the fragrance industry. I'm not going to take too much time, and I'm going to invite Martine to come and share some of her work with us, which will be followed by Annu's work, and then we will have the panel discussion. Welcome, Martine.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm just going to hello and thank you for having me. Bruno represents Alliance Française. And I'm going to be giving a very brief presentation as to my bio and kind of my overarching career. And then I'm going to present you a film, because all of a sudden when I saw this beautiful amphitheater, I thought, why not present the film that I did on my adolescent sons and their tribe of friends, which already, I guess I finished in 2009, which I don't really show that often because I always thought it would be a parallel kind of companion to the book. Now that my book on my 2 sons and their friends is going to be published by Steigle, I just came back from Germany, and it's probably going to be out in November, I feel a little freer to show the film. So it's going to be a very brief intro. You know my name by now. Is that working?
writing at the computer?
Okay. So just very briefly, I was between Paris and New York ever since I was 5. My parents came to the States. I've been between Paris and New York, which I consider my 2 alma maters, and all my work actually that I've been doing on my 2 sons and their friends, which you'll see the movie on, is always between France and the United States. So it's kind of a bicultural experience in terms of the family, which I think gives a different flavor in terms of the family configurations. I was in the corporate world for a long time, and sorry if I'm repeating myself because we had a little talk yesterday. So I always consider I've been, but I left the corporate world in 9/11, and that has something to do with, I was in the fragrance industry in the labs where I was sort of managing the noses and doing the creative direction to the noses, how to create better fragrances or more meaningful fragrances. In 9/11, I think things changed, and I felt that as a single mother, well, I'd been married but divorced, having a big corporate job was getting very difficult with my 2 adolescent sons, who were then 13 and 14, because I had to be doing a lot of travel, Paris, New York, a lot of social configurations, and I think I felt that I wanted to kind of have a different lifestyle and spend more time with my sons, especially in adolescence, where I think it's really the time where they need you the most, more than when they're babies. They really need for you to be present. So I decided to change my life, but I didn't do it as pure sacrifice because that's not really my style. I also did it because I didn't want to be in the corporate world anymore, and I felt a call to go back to school, back to photography. And I always done photography since I was a child, and my parents and grandparents did photography. So it was also something I'd always done, but not professionally. So I went back to school, and that's where I developed the project I'm going to be showing you today, which is called Teen Tribe. It's called, the big overarching concept is a world with 2 sons. It comes in 2 parts, but I'm only going to show you the first part, which is Teen Tribe, their adolescent years, 2005-2010. And the second part, which is their 20s, I won't show you today because we don't have time, and I haven't done a film yet on that. But you can go to my website, or when the book comes out, you can look at it. And you can ask me questions afterwards. But I do think that the fact that I'm a single mother, raising my 2 kids in a foreign country, has a lot to do about how we reimagined the family. And I also think it gave me access, perhaps I would have had, through my sons and their tribe of friends, who felt a little bit isolated in New York, and I was kind of their haven. So we had very strong conversations with the friends. They would stay up, and stay at my house. And I think that did create the kind of trust and the kind of openness and safety for them to be photographed in an intimate manner by me. So basically, the film, well, I'll say a little bit about the film when we get there. I'll just do a rapid conclusion on the bio. I also did something on the South Bronx trade, so I have a tendency to do long-term projects. You can go to my website, the craftsmen and the artisans in the South Bronx. And basically, I kind of divide my time between my personal work, my editorial work, and my teaching work. So depending on the period of the year, it could be sometimes 80%, like now it's 90% teaching, and other periods it's 90%, my personal work. So it really depends. But I'd say overall it's about 40% my personal work, and then the rest is teaching and editorial. So editorial, I've done things within most of the magazines in New York. So New York Times, New Yorker, FT also. So assignments, I'll just show you a couple. That was work that was published in the New York Times of mine, and this is the first assignment I got, so I care about it. We spent 2 days and you have a mission. You shoot the people dancing. And a lot of things I did for the New Yorker is supposed to be a little bit of humor, a little bit of a twist, not real portraits, more environmental portraits, so I'm just showing them to you quickly. Okay, so that's kind of the overarching presentation. The film I'm going to show you is when I finished the work on adolescence, my two sons and their friends, I decided just before they went to college to do a film where they would basically comment on the photos. So it's based on the photos. You're going to see a lot more photos than the ones I present in my fine art work. So there are a lot of fill-in photos that I use more for the narrative than really I would probably never print in a fine art gallery. And I wanted to give them a voice as to what were the stories behind the stories that I took, that a lot of times I didn't even know this was happening, because I just felt it as a sixth sense. So I'm giving them a voice to, what was really happening in their minds and their emotions during that period of time. So it's 30 minutes, and hope you'll find it entertaining and you can ask me any questions. It was done with very low budget, 2 days and a half of shooting, one location, and it's more about, really, their comments. Okay. And when I was observing my sons and their friends, it's not exactly what I saw of them.
So thanks to Martine for graciously sharing the stage with me today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation afterwards. And to Truchi, Varun, and Keith, and all the people at the Chennai Photo Biennale for organizing this, and to Alliance Française. And congratulations to all the people who have been accepted for this residency. So I couldn't help mention that if we can get the lights down in the audience. Better get the lights down. I couldn't help mention that I studied in Chennai, my undergraduate was at WCC, which is just down the road. And if you're trying to guess, that's me over there. And actually one of my college classmates is here today, and also my local guardian's daughter is also in the audience, my cousin. So about my presentation and today's discussion, I think the wonderful aspect of today's talk is that Martine and I have such different approaches to our work on the family portrait. We're on two ends of the spectrum. Martine focuses on intimately documenting her family, while my work starts with my archival images that I then build from, as you can see from this photo animation. So I would call myself a photo-based artist. I'm also going to talk about my present project, which is why I'm here on my Fulbright to India, that revolves around family photos. In particular, I'm going to talk to you about how you can help me. But first, I'm going to show you my earliest body of work that uses family photographs, which is fabricated memories. In 1998, I had the opportunity to return to England for 5 months. I initially was going to explore my memories of England, where I was born. But looking at my negatives, I realized that I linked my memories of England to memories of my father, who died soon after returning to India from England when I was 13. To commemorate his 20th death anniversary in 1998, I decided to create a small handmade accordion book Beyond remembering him, it reflects on the choices that I've made since his death. Oops. So these images are a reconstruction of memories from my childhood in the 1960s and 70s, using parts of snapshots from my childhood combined with images taken in England in 1998. The images are presented as small Polaroid emulsion transfers, where the distortion emphasizes the fluid feeling of memory. Some pages also include text. The contemporary photographs are taken with a holder, which is a plastic lens camera, and makes the images look a little soft and distorted around the edge, distorted like a memory. To reinforce the fact that my father died from the effects of smoking, the book is presented in a cigarette box, and the paper cover also includes shredded tobacco leaves. This paper has been stained with tobacco juice, so the viewer has a sensory experience of sight, smell, and touch. The pages of the book are made from a delicate handmade paper that accentuates the fragility of my memories. So here you can see the original image on the left, and the original image on the right, and how I took my father and my brother out of that image and put it into the more recent photograph. The work was meant as a personal project, but has been exhibited more than I expected. At the Royal Ontario Museum, we also had a small box of tobacco scent near the book so that it was a sensory experience for the viewer. And these are two installation shots. So I want to start with a quote by Dwayne Michaels, where he says, "I think photographs should be provocative and not tell you what you already know. It takes no great powers or magic to reproduce somebody's face in a photograph. The magic is seeing people in new ways." One of the unique qualities and challenges about photography is that it is derived from real life. With that constraint in mind, I'm continually struggling with ways we can use photography to illuminate a new perspective. So going on to the project of regeneration. In 2007, I received a McCall Johnson Fellowship from the Rhode Island Foundation. And what was unusual about this project was that it was not based on a project proposal, but it was based on my past work. So it allowed me to experiment with time-lapse animation, photography. And at the same time, when I visited my mother's friends, they would often show me their archival photographs. So I started a body of work called Regenerations, which includes 3 generations of women in what I call photo animations. And I'll show you one very shortly. I initially wanted to compare family photographs across cultures through the photo animation process. I expanded this project to include families from Vietnam and Israel and the Palestinian territories. So the final animation links older family photos, usually experienced as prints, to the newer ways of viewing images on our phones, tablets, and computer screens. I present the Regenerations work as framed iPads, so that initially it looks like a photograph. But on closer examination, one notices the subtle movement and changes. The archival image seems to come alive. So when I meet these families as strangers, and this 90-second video shows the different stages I go through in the process of connecting and collaborating with the families.
Grandfather, but I can't find my great-grandfather. My grandfather's brother's wife, and it starts before any other wedding.
Okay,
It's got a wedding dress.
Yeah.
It's very unusual for someone to wear a lehenga on a wedding And then they shifted to the Nairobi house. There they found the woods.
So a little bit about the process. It all starts with a family photograph. So on this first photograph is of Sadhana and her mother. And then this is Sadhana and her mother about 30 years later. I photographed them in the present. And then Sadhana with her daughter. So I take pictures of them, collaborating with them to reenact the original photograph, and then I put them back into the original photograph, convert them to black and white, and then create this animation. So there's actually a lot of post-production work that goes into creating these animations that can take weeks or months. I also create photos of the entire family so that they have something to put back into their own photo albums. And these photographs take on a new resonance, especially when one of the grandparents passes away, because these photographs take on this extra preciousness because they're the most recent professionally taken photographs they have in their albums. When I first meet these families, they're strangers. For me to connect with them and collaborate with them, the less distractions, the better. So my husband David usually assists me on the photo shoots and sets up the lights while I go through the albums and start talking and connecting to the families and collecting the stories. This time-lapse shows the whole shooting process. And you'll see that usually the granddaughter is the one who helps with setting up the lights and also posing the individuals. My trips to Vietnam, Israel, and the Palestinian territories made me more conscious of how political events shape the way that different families gather, keep, and appreciate old photos. And so this piece from Israel was pivotal in terms of the direction that it took my work. So when I found out that Lily Thao was actually a Holocaust survivor, it reinforced in my mind that every family has a more complex story than appears on the surface. This led to a project on partition that I will show you later in the slideshow, but it also led to this project called Majority Minority. As an immigrant minority and an American citizen, I'm triply aware that I and many others don't fit the historical stereotype of what an American is supposed to look like. 5 years ago, I started this project to highlight stories of immigrants, to push back and resist the rising anti-immigrant and minority sentiment. The America of yesterday, filled with the immigrants of European descent, is giving way to a new multicolored and multicultural America. Ironically, this work was done before the current wave of anti-immigrant rhetoric. So one of my goals is to create empathy and understanding for those who don't look typically American. So I'm going to show you Tuan's story. She was an immigrant from, had to flee Vietnam during the war with her family. We left a week before Saigon fell. We flew to Manila and spent a week at a US military base. Then a week at a refugee camp in Guam. And a month at Camp Pendleton, tent number 88. Other than $20 and a few clothes, all we had were these photos, which is a legacy that my father left us. They are irreplaceable. So I'm going to show you another one of Isabel, who's a Filipino-American, and since there's a lot of photographers in the audience, please note the chair that I had to recreate using Photoshop. When we first arrived, my mother and I didn't fight about grades. Only about folding clothes and vacuuming. My mother told me not to worry about money. She said we'll ask Oprah if necessary. So you remember the Holocaust survivor that I photographed? Well, going to the Holocaust Museum in Israel made me realize there's little to commemorate those affected by the partition of British colonial India. Wanting to explore this further led to my first Fulbright Fellowship in India in 2012. As many of you may know, during partition, over 15 million were displaced in just 3 months, and over 1 million died. Yet in my history books, I barely read anything about that. So for the last decade, I've been working on the stories of partition, initially from India, but also from Pakistan and Bangladesh. So this is the Kohli story. We fled from what is now Pakistan to India. I went from being wealthy to a penniless refugee. My father went back after 2 years to his home at Lakshmi Mansions, flat number 39. The person living there had a British mother and a Muslim father. The man asked if he would like a cup of tea. My father said, when I was served in my silver tea service with my monogram on it, I realized I was homeless. So as I mentioned, when I went back to the US, I realized I was only telling one side of the story and received funds from a professorship in nonviolence and peace studies to collect the same stories from the Bangladeshi and Pakistani families. And I think my interest in showing both sides of the story comes from having lived between multiple countries, that's England, India, and now the US. So I'm going to show you one from the Pakistani side. My mother never told me, my father, what happened. She said because he never asked. She never spoke about losing a child. My father said that he didn't want to know how she was saved, as there was always a stigma about it. My mother told my wife what happened and how my sister died. She was given a choice to choose between my sister or me, but couldn't make one. It was decided for her. What never ceases to amaze me is that I walk into these strangers' homes and they open up to me. We initially bond by looking at their albums. This is one of the strengths of photography, the power to trigger memories and share storytelling. The stories from both India and Pakistan, using their own family photographs, is presented in a hollowed-out 1947 encyclopedia with an iPad mini inside. Curator Bhakirathi Mani observed that the act of hollowing out the book is a metaphor for the violence that happened during partition. So I present the work, the Indian stories in one encyclopedia and the Pakistani and Bangladeshi ones in the second, side by side, with this video playing in the background. And it was recently shown in Delhi. So the work on partition led to a recent project commissioned by the Kochi, Missouri Biennale in 2018, and to my present Fulbright, which is why I'm in India. I can't see any of you, but can you yell out if you know how many Indians fought in World War II? Any guesses? I can hear some whispering. Anyone brave enough to take a guess? It's actually 2.5 million, which to me the number still amazes me. So I'm going to show you a clip from the Kochi project. It doesn't include family portraiture, but it leads to my present project, which does. Installation has a reflecting pool so that the viewer can also reflect on this history. And behind it are two historical looking books that have iPads that give more context to this history. So for Kochi, I only focus on the Italian campaign of World War II. And on the opening day, my friend Yamini Nair sent me this amazing photograph of a grandfather, Lieutenant Colonel Chakraborty. And this led me down a rabbit hole to crowdsource images of the 2.5 million Indians who fought in World War II. So you may ask, what is crowdsourcing? It's basically a fancy word for saying, you send me photos. So one of the things is that I'm only interested in photographs from photo albums versus official army photographs, because you can relate much more closely to a family photograph. and I'm going to show you some examples. My goal is to simply acknowledge the human stories and putting a face to the Indians who fought in World War II. Examples of some of the photos and stories that I've received so far. One is of Lieutenant Kala, who's actually mentioned in Times of India today. And this was him just 6 weeks after his marriage. And he was deployed to Europe. And this is an image of him later on, and you can see he's now cut his hair. And the reason was that he was captured in Italy and was in a prisoner of war camp. And over there, he picked up some Italian, and he and his friends managed to escape. And because he knew Italian, he was able to convince an Italian family to hide him and his friend. And they told him to cut his hair so that he'd look more Italian. And even after 50 years, since he came back to India, he and this Italian family have been corresponding with letters, and the daughter visited them after her father's death. Some other photographs. On the right is Captain Balakrishna. His family is actually from Chennai. And in the middle is Lieutenant Colonel Sundaram. And on the left is my granduncle, my grandmother's brother, Captain Casey Phillip. I had no idea that my family was affected by or involved with the Second World War. And by asking aunts and cousins, I discovered that my grandmother's brother was one of the people who fought, and we're still finding out some of the history. So I'm requesting you to ask your parents and grandparents about your own family histories. And yesterday at the Madras Literary Society, I received this photograph of Captain Krishnamurti, who became an air commodore. And he was stationed in Greece after the Battle of Monte Cassino and married a Greek woman named Venus. And this is Lieutenant Colonel Nanavati in a tuxedo with his medals. He fought again in Monte Cassino and then later became the military attaché for India in Moscow. In 1963, he was unfortunately killed at the age of 45 in a posting in Kashmir. So how will I use these images, and how will I use the images that you're going to get from me? So I've made a sample 3D crystal that I have with me, and I can pass that around after the talk. And that crystal shows you the soldier in a three-dimensional format. And it just gives a kind of a ghostly look to the image. And so I'm planning to use these crystals along with some of the archival footage of the Indians fighting in World War II. So ways that you can help: you can look through your own family albums, learn more about your family history. Again, ask your parents and grandparents if you don't already know. And this is another example of a photograph of Colonel Dasgupta. So when you find these photographs, if you can find them, send them to Indian Soldiers 1945 at gmail.com, and I have some business cards with me if you'd like to pass them on. You may be surprised about what you learn about your families. And what I'm trying to do is collect a wide swath of voices from all social strata into this body of work. So my email is indiansoldiers1945@gmail, and the website is the same. So can you help me put a human face on this parallel history? From the images I showed you of the soldiers from World War II, I want to ask you to think about how is a family photograph from those done from Army records? What comes through these family photographs? To me, it's the personality of the individual, a level of intimacy, and the relatability. Even though we don't know that person, we know them better through a posed photograph. And my website also has a way to contact me. And if any of you have photographs, David, who's here, has a scanner with him. So I'd like to end on this quote: "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Thank you very much. So if we could have the lights. Both of us have come from non-photographic backgrounds. You in the marketing industry, and me with an undergraduate in mathematics and working in computers. How do you think that's affected your work?
Well, I wasn't exactly marketing, more sociology, political science, which is what I studied. I was always in the creative, that's a horrible echo, right? I was always in the kind of creative domain, creative direction. And I think it's can we avoid the echo? It's kind of, no?
I don't think it's clear. It's clear to
Oh,
me.
it's just, I'm hearing the echo.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that the creative direction, managing other people, has affected me that, let's say, specifically when I photograph people, I really think hard about what I want to photograph, when I want to photograph it, so I kind of plan things out in my head. I observe a lot, I'm very curious, I'm always looking everywhere. And I make in my head situations I want to photograph. So it seems kind of like very casual, but I do make plans, things I want. So I think that, you know, having that creative direction background helped me in kind of foreseeing the situations I wanted to do. And also knowing that you can't always, if you're doing a long-term project like you do, sometimes you can't bombard people or can't bombard my subjects all the time photographing. I have to sometimes let go, even though there are situations I think are great and I would like to photograph, and it's not the right moment. And I'd rather win the big war than a couple of small battles. Yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah.
And how about you? What do you think your background brought to your process?
Well, I think to me photography is both a science and an art. And because of my scientific background, it was very easy for me to pick up the technical aspects of photography. So when I started shooting, I didn't want to be bogged down with the 4x5 or the technical aspects of all that comes with lenses and film. And so I chose to use a $20 Holger camera, which is very simple. It has one f-stop and the focusing is one person, a group of people, or the mountains. So I like the challenge of using such a simple tool to create beautiful images. I didn't show those today. I mean, actually, the color images.
You really got into very sophisticated Photoshop things afterwards.
Oh, that wasn't what I showed. I have another body of work, which is my only pure photography, and that is just darkroom printed images. But because of the knowledge of the scientific side, I know how to develop and print. But also in terms of the other expanding digital toolbox, to me it's not intimidating. It's like, I feel like a dog with a bone where I just love gnawing on it until I figure out the solution. So I think my computer background helped me with that.
And I have a question about your background because, you emigrated to the States, so you're also bicultural, and I was intrigued by the 3 generations project you had. And how do you think that relates to your relationship with your 2 previous generations, your grandmother and great-grandmother, I guess, and mother, perhaps?
Well, I actually never knew, I did know my grandmother, sorry, my cousin's here. I did know my grandmother. I think it's more, to me it was more about aging, and also about seeing how the different generations react being in front of the camera. The grandmother's always much more stiff in front of the camera. The mother in her dress is more of a hybrid between Indian dress and Western, and the kids just know how to pose and are usually more Western in clothing. And so I was more interested in those cultural appropriations that are happening over generations.
How about your own family? Were they the same as those subjects or different?
Well, by the time I started this work, my grandmother was no more. But I did a piece on my family. I don't have children of my own, but I have a stepdaughter. And in a previous body of work called An Indian from India, there's a picture of me and her together. So I used that as my family photograph, and I brought my mother in later because as my stepdaughter, she wasn't there from the start of the relationship. And so that's how it reflected in my own family story.
And how did this idea of these Indian soldiers come about? Just because I'm in France too, and we know that the first soldiers to go to war are, at least in France, the peasants, not the lower caste, but let's say, yes, usually the lower caste are the first to go to the danger zones, right? So I assume it's probably the same also here. So were these, because I saw you had a lot of lieutenants and colonels there, but how about just the basic footmen?
That's a really good question, and that is something that I'm getting help from a number of people to access those audiences. And yesterday actually was really good for making some connections, and I'm hoping some people here will give me some more connections with that. But it was a real swath of socioeconomic classes that took part in that. To make like a joke about it. I started this project on the soldiers, partially because doing the partition project was so draining and so emotional. I wanted to deal with something that was inanimate. So I thought I'd go to, I dealt with the soldiers I don't know more, but it really was a direct connection from partition. And I just found it fascinating. In a longer talk, I will talk about the different influences about the independence of India. I mean, what we study about is the Gandhian movement for independence and the INA, but I think it's three forces. It was a confluence of three forces that actually made independence happen. And the third one is about the Indian soldiers, and what I'm asking for is that to be part of the larger narrative that we have, not only in India but abroad.
What do you mean the third force? Because they were very disillusioned, so they were immediately wanted independence, and they were fighters in the independence. I don't know the story.
Well, they fought for the British, so when they came back and we were getting independence from the British, that part of history did not want to be acknowledged. So going back to, I think a little bit about the residency that you're working on. In India, family is sometimes a constricting and enabling structure. In the days that you've been working with your students, have there been insights, revelations about family here compared to France and the USA?
Well, certainly, I mean, compared to France or the USA, I think it's the mixture of religions is very important here. So the Muslim next to the Hindu, next to the Buddhist, especially people from Sri Lanka or other countries, I think that's very strong. Also issues that I think are strong in the West, but not as strong, like LGBT persecutions, but of course with Trump we have that too, which are very strong. Otherwise, I think it's just a question of degrees. Really, it's a question of degrees today in the world. How, families are animalized. What I'm so sort of surprised being of a certain age is that young people, because, basically the students are young, is how they want to go back to their past, and how, because they haven't lived with grandparents as much as our generation has, they're totally, they feel very alienated. They don't know their past. And we have many students here who have never, lived through that. And because I knew my great-grandparents, I knew my grandparents, I knew my parents, and my uncles, and my great-uncles. So without knowing it, growing up, I was the eldest, I had a lot of people telling me about where I came from, where my roots were. We would go to the graveyards, and I realized with a lot of the younger people that either because of economic reasons or religious reasons or different persecutions, they're not as linked to their past and to their past history. And that's something that really surprised me. So I think photography is a great way to reroute yourself, rediscover through archives and interviews, multimedia presentations, to really dig back into that.
At least in my experience, I have a vast network of family, but I think maybe we don't talk about our histories. And that came out for me in partition, where people in the 80s were suddenly now, with their end in sight, were willing to open up and talk about their stories. And I contacted a photographer to find me families, and he discovered his mother was a child of partition when his daughter did an oral history on her. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, in France we talk a lot about our family. The only thing we don't talk about is who collaborated or not in the war. So I imagine it's the same in countries that lived through great trauma, like India. There are sensitive issues. In France, there are sensitive issues. Who collaborated, who didn't, that's never talked about. So whenever there's big trauma like that, then the families do hush-hush. They're family secrets, right?
Well, that brings me to my next question, which you actually alluded to in your movie. Where is it?
I'll ask you a question
Okay,
until you
sure.
find it. So you said last night when we saw each other that this is probably the last project you're doing in India. So why would you sort of think that way?
I think that There's a lot of things that I'm interested in as an immigrant in the US, as now a US citizen, and it seems to be a time of upheaval over there that I feel as if my voice, I want to add my voice to what's going on over there. And as an immigrant, as a minority and an immigrant, I feel as if I have a perspective that I can add. So I do have a few more.
Do we open to questions or we? A few more?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things I've always been intrigued by is what photographs do not say. Like lost family secrets, like you mentioned. So can a photograph tell a full story? What are the differences and greater levels of meaning placed on or demanded by a fine art family photograph?
I think there's the mystery. It doesn't say, a documentary. I'm between fine art and, documentary. I'm not kidding myself. But I think a fine art photograph is going to keep a mystery. It's not descriptive. It's evocative of a feeling, of a state of mind, and actually in my portraiture. In the film, I show a lot more photographs than what I actually put on the wall, just because I'm telling more of a narrative. But I think in a fine art photograph or image, there's that evocation, and in my portraiture, I try to evoke states of mind of the adolescent, and that's what I'm after. And it's not telling the whole story. I mean, when the kids told me the story, this is the first time I got drunk, or this is the first time we didn't tell our mom, I wasn't aware of that. I just was aware that there was something happening that just didn't seem right. And that ambiguity, that kind of sixth sense thing, you sense. And I take a picture, I only learned afterwards that was going on. So I think, if I had taken the photo thinking, they have weed, they don't want to tell me, it wouldn't have been that picture. It would have been a documentary picture, strictly. Yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question.
So are there times you have to choose between the camera and being a mom?
No, I was a mom and a photographer. It was the same. I would just listen. My studio was on the bottom. They would do the parties on the top. They would tell me, we're going to have friends, and I would just come to the noise level or the non-noise level. I would just guess, this is a good time to pop in. Yeah. So, I mean, it was more, when we were on holidays, it was kind of cumbersome because it's always, I had my friends in the village would go to, and it was always, I realized I had to be tuned into the kids as opposed to be tuned into the adults. So it did ask for quite a few adjustments on my part that I have to be tuned into, what they're doing, what they're thinking, how they're going about their daily life. So it was work during the holidays. It's work being tuned in. Yeah.
So, do you have any other questions?
No, I think I'm good now. Are we good with time, or one more question? We're good?
Sure, one more question. Sure, I do have one of you.
Okay.
So historically, because of technology and economics, men have tended to be the family photographer. Back in the day, my father was the photographer in my family. Obviously that has changed, but how do you think that's changed in the contemporary visual image?
I think, as far as I'm concerned, people like Nan Goldin and Sally Mann, I think, have given women, at least myself, the permission to do these intimate projects without being, necessarily coined, family, mom taking photos. Nan Goldin because of the intimacy of her tribe, and I think Sally Mann because of the intimate photos she took of her children. I don't think men ever took photos like Sally Mann. Perhaps Ellen Goethe, perhaps to a certain extent, would be an exception. Because certainly Nicholas Nixon is very formal. So I think those two are examples. I think that led the way. They're the pioneers. Because, Cameron is very formal too. Yeah. But there has been Cameron also. Yeah. So, yeah, they're, role models, I guess. Women role models. Yeah.
Shall we open it up to questions?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, questions?
Well, you have mentioned Salman,
and I was just sort of curious. Will you direct the pictures, or it goes like a candid shots? Is it you tell them to pose the pictures, or how that works?
Yes. What was the first word? Will you what? The pictures?
You mentioned the photographer's Salomon, right?
Yes.
You have sort of influenced.
Yes. What was the word you used? When you...
Direct.
Oh, direct, yes, okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a mix. Sometimes I don't direct, and sometimes I reenact. So I will ask them to redo something if I don't think I have the photo. I'm not a photojournalist, so I can do that. It's not for a newspaper. And that becomes closer to the truth than if it were the truth, just the photo. So there are cases where I have asked them to redo something on the spot, like the picture of my son in that huge pool with the splash. He was doing that, but I said, I realized I didn't have the right photo. I shot about 10 frames and I asked him to redo it. He was very happy to redo it. He was flirting with a girl. So it wasn't, a problem. And sometimes when I think that the background is not nice, I'll take a jacket off the book, I'll rearrange the background, and then I'll say, I'll retake the picture if you don't mind. So there are some instances where I do, yes. And they're not staged in that sense, but they are lit, so everything is lit. Ambient light and or flash and or, sometimes hot lights.
Any other questions? I have a question for Martine. My question is about consent. In the Teen Tribe project, apart from your own children, there is a lot of kids who are underage who are part of the project, right? From the perspective of consent, what's your take, and how do you negotiate the whole?
You need consent when they're minor from the parents, and then once they're not minor anymore, just from them. So I have both.
Yeah, but I'm sure it's not as simple as.
Well, it's got to be simple.
Yeah.
That is it. So, but you had perhaps another question. You need the consent, yeah. They have a right of to answer your question. They have a right of veto. I always gave my sons and their friends a right of veto. They didn't feel comfortable with certain pictures, and there have been pictures I don't show anymore because the adolescent didn't feel comfortable with that picture. My sons also had right of veto on the pictures, and they saw the pictures.
Also, as they grow up, I don't know if they change their mind. And
that's the possibility, but you always change your mind when you grow up, right? What can you do?
Well, that's always open, right? I'm just curious, and it's very.
It is open, but it's a phase of their life, and if they're going to be in the book, that's it. They give consent. It's like. Yeah.
So, historically, Sally Mann's children did have problems after they grew up.
Yes.
Even if they gave consent at that time.
Yeah. It is a big issue. It's an evolution. And it's so much part.
It's so much part of the relationship with the parent too, How much love, how much hatred builds up. It's delicate, but, it's the family affair.
But I would say it's the family affair that gets opened up to the world outside. And I think that's where also she's kind of coming from. Because when you shot it, maybe it was a different time and their understanding of things were different. And when they grew up, it might change. And how do you navigate that process? Because it's already in the book is being published, it's with people like us and many, many people around. So how do you?
Besides the ones that didn't allow it when they were like 20, 21, most of them are in the creative fields. They're all in art galleries or doing arts. I can't see, hopefully I won't have problems, but you never know. That's life, you never know, right? I've got pictures of an old boyfriend I don't like. Before I was married, I don't like the photo. I wish it were not out there. It is out there, but that's my life.
Anyone else?
This question is for Annu. Are you expecting to receive images of women as well in the Indian Soldier project? Because I often find that military-based themes tend to have pictures of men.
So I've already got one female photograph of she's actually a gynecologist who was asked to work as a doctor in the hospitals because of the wounded soldiers. So I'm definitely also looking for images of women. And also people who may not have directly fought in the war but helped support them. So one of the people that I showed that we were running out of time was actually a radio operator, so we didn't actually fight in the field, but was connected to World War II.
And this number that you had, the 2.5 million, do you know what the gender ratio was, or is it just a number that we have from?
I don't know the exact ratio of men to women, but it was majority men.
Thanks, Gayatri. You stole my question. That's okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
One question for Martine. Taking photos in the US and in France, does it make a change on the relations to your subject, or is it equal?
I never thought about it. I think because the children are all French and American, I don't think it makes that much difference. It was just harder for me to take photos in France because it's all outdoors. And in the States, it was all indoors. So taking photos outdoors, you know, climbing rocks, on top of a mountain, or on top of a river, asked for a lot more. I mean, I had to, you know, with my flash and equipment, it was really more difficult. I prefer the ambient light and the kind of all these different lights and boudoir-like feelings of interiors. It was hard to do the outdoors at the beginning, but it taught me. But I think in terms of photographing them, no.
This question is for Annu. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about your process in terms of, like, you know, from the time of conception to then how you pick your material. Like, for example, how do you choose what kind of material you want to take? Photo albums, or, you know, government published sort of images of soldiers, and then how do you sort of sit with your material and then maybe sort of figure out finally that you want to sort of produce it in this particular way, like a crystal, like just in general?
So everyone's under the solution that artists just have this bolt of lightning and this idea comes in and, you know, it just works out perfectly. But behind every project that I've done, there's 10 failures. And it's only through the failures that it leads me to the project that I really want to do. I'm lucky that my husband's also a photographer, and we bounce ideas off each other. And after 2 weeks, if the idea still doesn't stick, I know it's not going to work out. The other thing is that for me, the ideas come first and the technique comes second. I don't want the technique to overwhelm the concept. They have to dovetail. One shouldn't overwhelm the other. And because of my technical background, I'm able to figure out different techniques that will suit the project. So actually, since you asked a question, I'll give you one of these. This is a lenticular print of the call center workers who work in India and pretend to be an American for a workday and go back to being an American at the workday. So I figured out the process after I photographed them.
Anyone else? Questions?
So I have a question. How many of you know if your families fought in World War II? So we at least have one. So I'd really encourage all of you to, ask your parents and grandparents to learn more about your histories.
So, Martine, what's next?
Oh,
Are you
what's
taking
next?
up? Are you
Oh,
continuing
yes,
to
sure.
photograph your sons, or are you working on other projects?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I just finished kind of putting together the book with I I photographed them in their 20s, so 2010, 2018, that's finished. And I I'm putting that in one book, 2005, 2018, which is going to be called Nicolas et Adrien, A World with Two Suns. So I just finished basically going through all of the material from 2010 to 2018 last year, knowing that I probably would publish it this year. I just came back from Steidl, so hopefully it will be ready for Paris Photos. So that was that, and after I finished the adolescence, I went on to a project on the little industries in the South Bronx for, I guess, 2010 to 2017, for 7 years. And now I'm kind of thinking, I will continue the 30s, and I think I might do something on my friends. Intimate portraits of my friends. That's where I think I'm going now. Because I think friendship is never talked about, and it's a beautiful quality. People always talk about love, but friendship is a lot more lasting than most loves, and unconditional. And since I like to take intimate portraits, I think that's kind of where I'm thinking of going.
So I just wanted to pass around the crystal that I was talking about.
Any other questions? Anyone? Martine, I wanted to ask you, I observed that in the film, that in the video that you showed, there were these pictures of, your kids and their friends enjoying and partying, and also in probably a tube or bus or something, or a car somewhere.
A disco bus.
A disco bus.
Disco bus, yes.
Yeah. And clearly you were part of all those moments around. How do you, isn't it I kind of felt at that time that you're present in probably every moment of their lives, and don't they kind of find that a bit like interference? And how do, if they're going out to party, do they want their photographer mom also to be accompanying them to make these moments for her book or whatever, for her project? But then I was also amazed at seeing that how they were quite natural and kind of almost, it's like how you were just invisible to them in those moments. So how do you work that around? If they're going partying, do you just go along, or how does that work?
I've known them since they were 7, very, very young. And I think because New York is such an impersonal place, my place was a haven to them. They knew they could come, they could sleep over. I would leave them alone, but I had rules. I would always have good cuisine. I would never tell the parents about things that were happening. I would always let the other kids deal with it. I would interfere if it really was bad. And I also think that I would only be there 20 minutes. I would tell them, look, I'm only staying 20 minutes. And most parties, I wouldn't go up to their bedroom. I would just let it go. And once in a while, I'd say, oh, I'm going to take this. It seems good. All the steps, I could see through my studio who was going up. I could sort of sense, oh, this is going to be a good one. And then I would go up. But I wouldn't go up each time. The after prom, that was a very close call. Because I had told my sons I wanted to go. They were kind of deciding, it was 3 days before. One of my sons wanted me to go, and the other son didn't want me to go. But then I thought, oh, so they both wanted to be, in solidarity to each other. So then I had a conundrum, right? And I then called the girlfriend of one of my sons who wanted me to go and said, Zoe, you saw Zoe, I'd really like to go. Why don't you, it'd be great. It's kind of like, I was thinking a book, I said, that's a good conclusion. So then I negotiated with my son, I said, and they said, you can come if you bring the Gordon Gin's bottle. So, like my camera ready, and then Zoe texted me, I had the Gordon Gin bottle ready, and then Zoe texted me, I had 10 minutes to get to where I had to go with the bus, and then hopped on the bus. Now, in the bus, they couldn't see me, it was pitch black. It was pitch black. So, with my flash minimized, I could get what basically the eye could only perceive. So they weren't seeing much of me. It was pretty dark, except for once in a while, my little flash. So that's what happened. And also there was another reason. When we got to Shelter Island, there was the mom, and she didn't want to be the only chaperone. So also I was a chaperone. So it's a bit of ruses, but you get around.
The kids grew up in New York. How did all their friends end up being French American?
Because they went to the French lycée, the Lycée Français de New York. It's a school that's a French lycée. They're all around the world, and they're probably the most international schools because most international people, bankers, educators, that's the only way. Even the British don't have that, or the Americans. It's the only way to have constant education wherever you go in the world, in main cities. So they're not only French people, but they're French-speaking people, and they were at the Lycée Français de New York, which is a bilingual school, French-English. Or I'm sure there's some perhaps in Delhi, and they're then Hindu, French.
Martin, I have a question. Since you mentioned that one of your son is younger, there's an age difference. So after prom, how is the other one allowed?
Because one got, reculé, he doubled his
credits.
He repeated, yes.
Okay.
He repeated, yes.
Okay.
So they ended up in the last 2 years in the same.
Okay.
Good question.
The question is for I'm curious about your book project. Could you please tell us how it worked out? Who put down the book for you, or things like that?
As soon as I started the project, I would do a little book per chapter, so it would be per year really. So 2005, 2006, and 2006, 2007. And then I put a book mock-up together, and I met several publishers that were interested, and I settled on the title. That was in 2011, but I had to wait until 2018 to get the book published, so by that time I had worked until 2018, and that was all put in one book. How you find a book publisher is always difficult, so it's chance and relationships.
I have a question for David, actually. David, sorry, I'm turning the questions around. Since you've been working so closely with Annu on her project, and probably this is not the only one, I'm not sure, what are your thoughts on her work? And I assume that you spend a lot of time traveling with her, meeting all these families, and is this more of a collaborative project, even in terms of not just setting up the lights and stuff, but also in terms of how to take it forward? If you could share some of your thoughts.
I'm not sure that's a fair spot, but I'll do my best anyway. I'm very good with technology. I worked as a photojournalist, so I have a background of working with people and working in more challenging situations. Actually, when you started to ask the question, my thought went in a completely different direction. And that is that the issues that Annu works on interest me immensely. I'm your generic, older, white, male American. And issues of immigration and issues of communities of color, the current political climate, all of these things are really, really important to me. But for a number of reasons, I have never really been able to make much artwork around them. When I was a photojournalist, I did some projects that related to some of those issues. But photojournalism has changed so much, I don't do that kind of work anymore. Now I mostly work in films. So we collaborate, but it's really her project because Martine said something really interesting about men not being able to photograph families the same way. I would be surprised if an old white middle-class male from the US could do some of the things that she could do. The one area of exception is I'm Jewish, which in the US makes you a minority, which gives you a little bit of an outsider perspective, but most of it's a different perspective that she brings to it just by her culture of origin of all those different things that she's done along the way.
I also have to add that my ego is too big to collaborate.
Thanks for that. Okay. If there are no more questions, maybe we can bring this discussion to a close.